Remember what happened with Sagada? Batanes, you're next. You're My Boss is written and directed by Antoinette Jadaone and stars Tony Gonzaga, Coco Martin, Freddy Webb, and J.M. De Guzman. And in You're My Boss, Georgina, played by Tony Gonzaga, is this kind of stuck-up businesswoman who's trying to strike a deal with this Japanese businessman, but she can't because she's only like second in command. So she gets Pong, played by Coco Martin, who is this like lowly assistant guy, and says that he's actually her boss. So they go along with this ruse, and of course along the way they develop feelings for each other. Now, just like any movie with Antoinette Jadaone at the helm, of course, I think You're My Boss had great acting and really good directing, but I also just thought that You're My Boss has lots of unnecessary and mishandled elements as well. First of all, I guess it's worth noting that You're My Boss does that whole mainstream rom-com thing where they like to set up contrast within characters by using locations and costumes and whatnot. You know, you have like really high-end attire and like places, but you also have like the, you know, kind of more modest attire and, you know, Batanes also. And I guess, you know, it's not really innovative anymore at this point. I mean every romantic comedy does this now, but, you know, I will admit that it really does work. This movie also has a lot of great shots also, although for me not necessarily with the Batanes part, but in the smaller moments. I think the smaller moments actually look the best. They're the most well shot, I think. Now, the central character here, Georgina, she is very flawed, but for me, she's flawed in a way that makes her very relatable and likable instead of like weak and insulting to women. You know, like, I think her problems are very kind of, you know, hard for some people to admit. So it's nice to see someone, you know, on screen representing, you know, these people who can't really admit this to themselves, and I really liked how they explored her character. And what I really like about Antoinette Jadone's writing is that she really is able to, you know, write kind of like confessional dialogue, especially for women, and make it sound, not make it sound like melodramatic or overly expository or anything. Like, it has that awkwardness. She's not afraid to like swear a lot, and I think that's kind of really refreshing. Tony Gonzaga kind of overplays her being a stuck-up like boss, but for me, she's just so great at doing everything else in this movie that it was easy for me to forgive her. You know, she's very sympathetic, and even when she has her moments of being like a queen bee or whatever, like, you really do feel for her. Coco Martin's lisp and his everyman looks really, I think, come into good use in this movie because he plays someone who's, you know, essentially very innocent at heart. And for me, the way Antoinette Jadaone directs, like, she really just proves that her strength really does lie in smaller moments, smaller gestures, that really do speak volumes. And I do think she also knows how to use modern technology, like, in a storytelling way very well, like in a believable way that doesn't seem like she's reaching for anything. But I do have quite a few problems with You're My Boss. For one, it's just way too long. This movie is 2 hours long, and that's about, you know, 30 minutes longer than it needs to be. Mostly because this huge chunk of the movie is set in Batanes, and it really could have just been taken out completely. They only put the characters in Batanes to, like, you know, bond or whatever, but they could have bonded, you know, in the city. Like, the Batanes stuff suddenly feels like a travelogue or whatever, all of a sudden. And even like the Sagada-esque shots that they try to do in this movie, they're kind of ruined by a lack of knowledge on how to stabilize drone cams because the footage ends up being like really weird and choppy. And I really don't like how Pong changes his character near the end. I think it's extremely hard to believe. I really think it goes against everything he was set up to be. And I do think that, of course, a movie like this is gonna have like this weird third act conflict near the end, which is super contrived and, you know, is completely unnecessary to the development of these characters, in my opinion. All in all, I would say that You're My Boss is still an okay movie, although at this point I think Antoinette Jadaone really needs to figure out how to strike a balance between her own style and what the mainstream wants, so, you know, her own, you know, style doesn't get compromised. But those are my thoughts on You're My Boss. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.